As a currently retired educator with over 30 years in Jefferson County, I have vivid memories of starting each school year with new students and a refreshed optimism to overcome challenges in order to have yet another successful school year. Anxiously waiting to get into my classroom to refine lesson plans and make other necessary preparations in order to meet the identified needs of my students. However, what we will be sharing with you for the next few minutes does not require lesson plans, but is designed to increase your awareness of the powerful role that you, as members of our school community, can play in helping accomplish the goal of Jefferson County being child abuse free in 2023.
Coles Charities Face It movement began in 2012 in response to the public outcry against the increasing number of child abuse deaths in our Commonwealth. Coles Charities, who has stepped up to protect vulnerable children for over 90 years, brought together key partners to plan a campaign to address the problems of child abuse deaths in Jefferson County and the surrounding areas.
Thank you, Jerry. We appreciate Coles Charities' initiative to bring this group together to end child abuse. We all have the right to be treated with dignity and to expect our church to reflect God's pure love and goodness. It takes all of us working together, however, to make this happen. As teachers within the Archdiocese of Louisville, you have been called to a very special ministry focused on the well-being and ongoing formation of the children and young people entrusted to your care. Kentucky law requires any person who knows or has reasonable cause to believe that a child is dependent, neglected, or abused shall immediately cause an oral or written report to be made to a local law enforcement agency or the Kentucky State Police, the Cabinet or its designated representative, or the Commonwealth's attorney by telephone or otherwise. This reporting requirement includes all clergy, employees, and volunteers within the Archdiocese of Louisville. If at any time you have reason to believe that a student may be the victim of abuse or neglect, you are required to report the situation immediately to authorities. Your role as a teacher is to report. The role of local authorities is to investigate. Our Archdiocese of Louisville Handbook for Catholic Schools, your local school faculty handbooks, and the Restoring Trust document contain the telephone numbers for making reports. Thank you for saying yes to your call to teach in a Catholic school and your commitment to create and maintain a professional, safe, and nurturing environment for our students and young people. We can be the face that ends child abuse in our community.
My name is Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician at the University of Louisville and director of the Coles Charities Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine. Essentially, I and my team evaluate children who are the potential victims of child abuse or neglect. As the mother of 3 school-age children, it's important to me that our teachers and other school personnel are not only excellent educators, but they are also aware of the signs of child abuse and willing to face it and report it to help protect our youngest citizens. First, we're going to talk about bruising, since that's one of the most overlooked signs of child maltreatment. I'll talk about locations of bruising and different patterns of bruising that we can be aware of and keep our eyes out for. After that, we'll talk a little bit about documentation and reporting to Child Protective Services. While the tips that I'm going to cover today apply to all of the students and young children that come through our schools, I would also encourage you to apply these same ideas to the rest of your lives in the grocery store, at neighborhood events, or even at gatherings of our own families. As I mentioned before, bruising is the most commonly missed sign of child maltreatment. Keep the 10 bruising rule in mind. TEN stands for torso, ears, and neck. Anytime that we see bruising in any of these areas in school-age children, we need to be concerned about the possibility of abuse. Some of the photographs that I'm going to show as part of this presentation may be disturbing to some viewers because they depict injuries in school-age children. In this photograph, you can see bruising to a child's buttocks. Now, obviously, this body part is not generally going to be visible in a child who is clothed and at school. However, sometimes we do get glimpses of the edges of these injuries when children bend over to pick up a backpack, for example. So the reason that I am showing them here is so that you understand that while the bulk of the injury may not be visible, even if you see hints of injury under or around clothing, this can be an important thing to identify. In these images, you can see injuries to children's ears. Now, ear bruising can have lots of different appearances and colors and locations within the ear itself. However, studies have shown that ear injuries in general are very rare from accidents in young children. Consequently, whether the bruises are subtle or very obvious, whether they're dark purple or even the faintest of red, if we see injuries to the ears of our students, this is worthy of notice. Neck bruising. The neck is actually a fairly protected part of a young child's anatomy. When children fall, or even when they're wrestling or playing on playground equipment, the neck very, very rarely gets injured accidentally. So when bruises or other marks become visible on the necks of our children, that can be a red flag. In particular, pay attention if you see bruises on the underside of the chin near the jawline. This can be a sign of a particularly high-risk situation. One other thing to be aware of is young infants should not have bruises at all. Now, obviously, our youngest infants aren't our students yet, but sometimes they are visible in the school building and at school functions because they are there with their siblings. If you see bruises on babies, either in the school setting or out in public, please take notice, document, and make the call to report. Bruising on babies is not normal, and sometimes the observation of an astute bystander can make the difference for the safety of a young child. Other kinds of bruises to recognize are patterned bruises, and the two most common patterned bruises that we see in school-age children are slap marks and loop marks. Here are some examples of slap marks. These bruises typically have a stripe-like appearance. Their most common location is on the left side of the face, but they can really be seen anywhere. In this child, the history was that he had run into a wall. Now, running into a rigid object will not leave behind linear bruises such as this. Anytime we see stripe-like or linear bruises on a child, this should get our attention and make us consider a report to social services. In this image, you can see a loop mark. Now, these other dark areas here are actually chickenpox scars, so you can disregard those. But this U-shaped injury, especially with this part of the injury that looks like a double train track, this is what we call a loop mark. We see this injury anytime a flexible object is bent over upon itself and used to strike a child. The most common implements that inflict loop marks are cords, belts, extension cords, and wire coat hangers. You can see in some of these subsequent images that loop marks can have various different appearances, but many times they will have this U-shaped component and the double train track component. If we see those, they need to be documented and reported immediately. Loop marks, along with slap marks, are diagnostic findings of inflicted injury. In addition to bruising and other injuries, other things to watch for include children who wear long sleeves or long pants or even turtleneck clothing when it's hot or warm outside. This can be an attempt by either the child or the caregivers to hide injuries. Should you notice this, it's perfectly acceptable to ask the child to push up their sleeves or show you the skin of their neck, so that you can ensure that they are not injured. Another common pattern is that sometimes children are kept home for school for a day or two when their injuries are particularly severe or too likely to be noticed. If a child tends to miss a day or two and then return to school with injuries that look relatively new, this can be a red flag. This is worth discussing with school administration to make the decision about whether a call to Child Protective Services is indicated. Once you've identified a child who has some findings that you find concerning, it's perfectly okay to ask the child what happened. You can ask open-ended questions that aren't leading. In other words, things like, what happened, or how did you get that boo-boo? What we don't want to do is ask questions that are too specific or that imply that the injury was inflicted, such as who hurt you. Documentation. Documentation is critical when it comes to child abuse reporting. Making notes of the dates or times that we notice injuries on children and details about their explanations can be critical to investigators. Even if you decide not to call or report in to Child Protective Services, it's still important to keep notes about observations you make regarding children's injuries or other things that concern you. As you have already heard, all of us in Kentucky are mandated reporters. Anytime we have a reasonable suspicion that abuse has occurred to a child, we are required by law to report to Child Protective Services or law enforcement. In many school settings, teachers and other staff members are asked to bring their concerns to school administrators, such as the principal, to discuss prior to making the call. One thing that we tend to encourage in this scenario is for all of the involved parties to sit in the room together when the call is ultimately made. This helps ensure that the person with first-hand knowledge of the appearance of the injury, for example, or the explanation that the child offered, that person is able to give accurate detail to Child Protective Services on the phone. Meanwhile, the school administrators will have the opportunity to listen to the details of the report and fulfill their own mandated reporting requirement. Remember that even though you might be required to discuss with school administrators, that does not fulfill your reporting requirement. Consequently, everyone with concern should participate in the call. When making a report to Child Protective Services, it's important to be objective and provide details and be very specific about your concerns. In other words, describe bruises in location or what they look like, give specifics about what the child offered as an explanation for the injuries, include all of the issues with the child that raise concerns. Sometimes it's helpful to have some notes in front of you before making the call. Here at the University of Louisville in Kosare Charities Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine, we are available to assist school personnel in making some of these tough decisions. We are more than happy to take your call and discuss scenarios to help ensure that we all do the right thing for our kids. Thank you for your attention today on this very difficult topic. I admire all of you and your work and encourage you to continue to face it and end it.
Thank you, Dr. Curry. I get it. You have plenty on your plate, increased demands because of test scores, new curriculum to implement, those daily challenges around classroom management. But battling child abuse is really at the core of what it means to be an educator. It is at the core of what it means to be a school community. Our kids need you to protect them, and they deserve no less. Child abuse in your school? Face it. End it.